What's good, everybody? So I want to talk about Ubisoft again. My last video was detailing the whole situation with their monetization director and what he said on LinkedIn. And I want to go over sort of how I would try to save Ubisoft if I was tasked with what's probably an impossible task at this point. But I think in going over how one would try to save Ubisoft, a lot of the problems that they have become more apparent. Some that I'm sure have been talked about ad nauseum. And then one which I think is probably the most important point that kind of gets glossed over with all the different cultural stuff that goes on, with all their monetization stuff that goes on, with the fact that their gameplay is very redundant in how they structure their games. But we will get into all that. I think first, if I was tasked with, if they came to me and said, okay, we need you to fix this company so that it is solvent. One of the things that really needs to be addressed with Ubisoft is their workforce. And I just wanted to use an example to sort of bring to light how big of a problem this really is. So right now we're looking at the screen. This here is the market capitalization of Ubisoft. Right now, 1.74 billion euro. Now, I don't know the exact conversion to US dollars. I think it says 286 is their US dollar stock price right now. But either way, it's low. Okay, it is low. Granted, I realize if you go, let's see, back 5 years, you can obviously see that it was far greater at another point in time when they had maybe 10 times the amount of actual value to the company that they currently have. But either way, right now, this is what they're worth relatively, or at least what the market has determined they're worth. All right, so let's look at a different gaming company before we want to establish why their workforce is such a problem. Let's go ahead and look at, this is Activision Blizzard and their market capitalization at the time that they were purchased by Microsoft. And we're going to be talking about Microsoft Game Studios as a whole, or Xbox Game Studios, rather, their first party. But it's hard to talk about their first party simply because a lot of their value is just wrapped up in Microsoft anyway, so you can't really determine what the gaming studios that they possess are worth versus what the overall company is worth. But we do have some metrics that we can follow to determine that. Here, we know at the time that they absorbed Activision Blizzard, they had a $74 billion market cap, roughly. If you want to look at when they absorbed Bethesda, I think they paid $7.5 billion. Now, that was not a publicly traded company, but I'm guessing their evaluation is based off of what they thought the company would be worth if it were public. Then you factor in that they absorb studios like Obsidian, they absorb Ninja Theory. There's a lot of different studios they absorbed on top of the first party studios that they had before that, on top of their 343, all their Gears, Forza, Halo, Microsoft Flight Simulator, all of the IP that was there before they started acquiring all these studios. So I think it's safe to say if you bundled all that together and you were very conservative with the actual estimations, you would say somewhere north of 80 billion. Now, granted, I realize that this evaluation is based off of what they were worth at the time that they were absorbed. I don't know how their value's been affected by being shoved into Xbox's sort of overall business strategy, how if Game Pass has devalued what they're worth. They're a very confusing company as far as their strategy goes. So we're just going to take the numbers that we have and go off of those. So when we look at Xbox Game Studios, we got to ask, well, how many people are working under Xbox Game Studios? They had layoffs. I think it was probably about a year ago now. But 20,100 employees. And now this is just a rough guesstimate. I'm not going to say this is exactly how many employees they have. But that gives you an idea of roughly their value to roughly the size of their workforce. And the reason that I put this out there is because I think the workforce is the number one job if you work for somebody is to return value for that company. So when you look at the amount of employees there, and by the way, if my dogs start barking, please disregard. They're in the sunroom because they keep on making noise when I have them in here while I record. But if you look at the amount of people that Xbox Game Studios has, and what they're returning as far as value to the overall company, you get 20,100 employees is giving you roughly a market value of 80 billion. Now, granted, this is 1.74 billion euros. I don't know the exact conversion off the top of my head, but I'm sure if I did the conversion, it would be nowhere close to 80 billion US dollars. So how many people are working at Ubisoft? Well, this is an AI estimation of 19,011 employees. Now, down on one of Ubisoft's websites themselves, they have 21,000 employees. I don't know what the exact number is, but I would say you could probably look at those two numbers and figure out that it's somewhere around there. So you're talking about a company that is nowhere close to the size of Microsoft, probably nowhere close to their level of output. If you look at the amount of IP that's owned, because if you also look at Xbox Game Studios, this is 40 different studios altogether. So we're talking about relatively similar workforce sizes for companies that have not remotely close to the same amount of value. I think if you look at how to save Ubisoft, and I would never advocate for anybody getting fired, but just the math of it, just to make it make sense, I think you would have to start off by closing a lot of studios, letting a lot of people go. And I never advocate for that because I know it's a life-changing thing for people. But this company should have never gotten remotely close to this large to begin with, all right? The problem that they have right now is they have a workforce of a much, much larger company. And that's, I think, really to get them into a place of solvency, they have to come somewhere close to possibly the largest single bundle game layoff that we've ever seen within the industry. I think that's really just the first issue that they face, is that their workforce is not at all in the realm of reality as to what they're producing. Now let's talk about what they're producing, or what they would have to produce to try to save the company, because I also do think that's important. Now, a lot of people, this is probably not going to make happy, because there's a lot of different Ubisoft products out there. I'm sure there are people saying, well, they gotta get another Beyond Good and Evil sequel out there, or they gotta, there's a long list of like Watch Dogs, there's a long list of Ubisoft products that have kind of come and gone by the wayside that a lot of people will be like, well, if they're going to come back, this is going to have to clearly be part of their overall strategy. And I think really the reality of it is, at the point Ubisoft is at, not only have they lost a lot of trust amongst gamers, they've also got themselves into a hole where they sort of need to rebuild the pillars of their company. So let's talk about what I think they should do with each one of those pillars. If their goal was to get in the black ink immediately, establish a little bit of better relationship with the customer, and try to provide themselves some relevancy going forward with an audience that's going to be changing over the years. First off, let's touch the Assassin's Creed. I'm not an advocate for massive amounts of remakes, but I do think here the most realistic thing that we could do is probably look at the products that they have within the Assassin's Creed franchise that are universally loved. Because right now, every product they release is also sowing new division, whether it be for cultural reasons, whether it be, just overall exhaustion with their game formula, whether it be their monetization. Everything that they're putting out there right now is divisive. So they need to put out products that don't divide but unite us as gamers. And I think that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the Black Flag remake that's been rumored to come out. But I think they need to take it a step further. I think one of the big things you probably need to do is remake the Ezio trilogy. And I mean remake it. I'm not talking a remaster. I'm talking ground up rebuild it. And when you make these games, I don't think you can sell them at a premium. I'm thinking $60 has to be the max on these remakes, because you're talking about 3 different games. Ideally, if you really wanted to help kind of fix public relations, you would try to bundle them together to some degree. But I realize tigers don't change their stripes. So realistically, I think 60 is your cap. 40 would probably be your target, though. Like if you really wanted to get yourself in a position where these were going to help you PR wise. But it may be that the black ink's more important. And I do think they would still have to work on a new Assassin's Creed, but right now they don't need another Yasuke situation. They don't need another single player experience booster that you pay for. Like, there's a lot of things that have come in recent Assassin's Creeds that they do need to sort of get around or get away from. And I think remaking the Ezio trilogy, while it may not be the most creative of decisions, I do think it helps them build back some of that PR, put out products that they know are going to sell, that they know people are want, that they know there is demand for, so they at least have that in the bag. All right, let's talk about what I think is their second pillar, Far Cry. Now, Far Cry 3, I think, kind of established what we think of as the structure of the modern Ubisoft game. Towers everywhere, map littered with different markers and objectives. And I think over time they have just beaten that formula so into the ground that people are so sick of it that I do think that they need to kind of veer away from that, and they need to get back into a type of game with Far Cry that has maybe a little bit more exploration elements in it, a little bit more discovery for the player. And so I think it needs to kind of go back to its roots. Now, I might be alone on this one. There might be some people who say, no, the formula works, keep pushing the formula. But I think of the early Far Cries. I think of Far Cry 1 really being a prime example of a game that had elements of exploration that we enjoyed. I think a game that also had a little bit of science fiction swing to it. I think that's something that the Far Cry universe or Far Cry IP got away from, that it would be probably behoove them to bring a little bit more fantastical elements within to those titles. I do think Far Cry worked best in a tropical environment, so I would think that they would want to try to get back to those roots. Even Far Cry 3 kind of had a tropical environment to some degree. So I think really you need to bring back a sense of wonder, a sense of exploration. You need to unstagnate your most stagnated franchise, and you need to provide the user with an experience that isn't the same experience over 100 times with a different coat of paint on it. So I think if you went to Far Cry and you sort of rebranded that, sort of doing like what, if you would think of like what God of War 2018 did, where it doesn't completely abandon the structure of the previous God of Wars, but it approaches it in a very different way to where it felt very new and fresh. I think Far Cry needs that kind of level of rebranding at this point. The last point, and this is one where probably people will have some disagreement with me. I understand that. I think you need some sort of franchise that has relevance with a younger audience, that can attach you to a younger audience. I think Ubisoft has seen this problem. I think if you think of the Mario vs. Rabbids games, those were games where they were trying to attach themselves to an established IP. They were trying to take the Rabbids and attach them to Mario because Mario kind of has eternal relevance. I mean, maybe not so much with kids anymore, but I think still to a degree it does. Like, I still think there's a certain magic to Mario that they wanted to put themselves side by side with. I do think you need to get Rayman and the Rabbids back into the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak. And the way that I would do that is kind of follow what Mario did. I think you need a Rabbids movie. I think you need a Rabbids movie. I would probably give it to the same people who do, you know, the Despicable Me's and the Minions movies, because really the Rabbids are more or less Minions to begin with, to a certain degree. I mean, their portrayal is a little different, but they kind of meet that same basic criteria of wackiness. And I think that would probably be a good studio to tackle the representation of them. But you do need to put something out there that kids will see. And then side by side with that, I think a new 3D platformer, either Rayman or Rabbids game. Now, I will say this game cannot be a super huge financial risk for you, because you are sort of taking a flyer at trying to bring in a new audience, but there's some identification that you do need to grow. So I believe that if you can control the overall budget of a 3D platformer, sort of do like what PlayStation did with Astrobot. Now, I don't know if you will really look at Astrobot and say it's a huge financial success for Sony, but then again, Astrobot wasn't attached to a movie at the same time. I think you need to get something that's in front of a younger audience and something that they identify with, and then that way, as they grow, there's some attachment between them and Ubisoft. And I think that helps shore up your future and gives you some sort of path forward. Now, obviously, I don't mean to like you're going to abandon Prince of Persia, or you're going to abandon Watch Dogs, or you're going to abandon, like Rainbow Six or anything like that. Or, obviously, all of those to some degree will be part of your path forward. I think Rainbow Six probably more so than some of the others. I think Prince of Persia is possibly, I don't know that really has a huge amount of relevance with a large enough audience anymore. And they haven't really done anything super good with the IP in so long, or something that is so good that was absorbed by a wider market in so long, to where that can really help you out of this in a tremendous way. I do think as you establish these basic pillars, you can branch out and you can try to do something with these other IPs that you own, but you need to shore up your base right now. And it's your base that is incredibly damaged. And I think these few things would help you. Now, obviously, I don't know what the future will hold for Assassin's Creed, particularly even Shadows, really. But I think if you bring back the Ezio trilogy, bring back something everybody is positively attached to, you have to unstagnate Far Cry, and you have to attach yourself to youth. And those are my 3 pillars for how I would fix Ubisoft. Anyways, whatever yours are, let me know down in the comments. And if you found this useful, go ahead and do all the YouTube stuff. Anyways, guys, we will catch you on the next one. And until then, get awesome.